On the attempt. City Attorney, do we need to report out from our closed session?
No, there was nothing done in closed session that requires reporting out at this time.
Wonderful. All right. We'll go ahead and get things started. Let me get my my little agenda going here. All right. So if we could bring up the flag and go ahead and do the little Pledge of Allegiance, that would be great. And here we go. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I can't wait until I can call on somebody in the audience and force them to do that again. That's going to be, I don't know if I'll get that privilege ever again. It might be a new mayor by the time that's allowed. All right, great. If we could, I'll go ahead and explain the process for public comment. So we are having a Zoom meeting or a virtual meeting as is allowed under Governor Newsom's executive order allowing for the existence of virtual meetings. The way that we'll do public comment is if you're an attendee, you'll go ahead and raise your hand. Don't do it physically, do it virtually. And you'll be called upon and brought into the meeting. Upon being acknowledged by the mayor, that's me, you will have 3 minutes to speak and state your opinion. And we'll do both a general public comment, and then we'll also have public comment on various items of the regular meeting. If you would like to submit a written public comment, you may do so at publiccomment@sonomacity.org. And if you do submit a written public comment, that will be read by Latanya. And she will do an amazing job, but she will only get 3 minutes to read your comment. So we're going to limit everybody to 3 minutes, and that's the way it's going to work. The other thing to note here is that this is a virtual meeting, and one of the things that happens with virtual meetings is occasionally people find it enjoyable to Zoom bomb us or try to take control of the meeting. In the event that that happens, we will pause the meeting at the time that that has occurred and try to restart the meeting. No further action will be taken when the meeting is paused, and we will come back to that point in the meeting. If that is impossible, we will close the meeting down and continue it to another date. And with that explanation, I'll move on and ask for a roll call vote from our roll call, just not a vote, but who's here. And I'll note at this time that Councilmember Harrington is not attending this meeting because she's recused from this item due to the fact that one of the locations of the cell towers is directly near her house. So with that, we'll go ahead and have a roll call from our acting city clerk, Wendy Ackman.
Councilmember Cook.
Here.
Councilmember Agrimonti.
Here.
Vice Mayor Hundley.
Here.
Mayor Harvey.
Present. Wonderful. Oh, and we did it out of order, but that's classic me. Report on closed session. We already did that. And we'll go ahead with the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Agrimonti, seconded by the Vice Mayor. And if we could get a vote.
Councilmember Cook.
Aye.
Councilmember Agrimonti.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Hundley.
Aye.
Mayor Harvey.
Yes. Wonderful.
Motion. Great.
Beautiful. Unanimous vote. One sitting out. We'll move on to consent calendar. Oh no, we got to move on to, we have no meeting dedications, no presentations, but we got to do comments from the public. At this time, members of the public may comment on any item not appearing on the agenda. So some things that are not on the agenda. It is recommended that you keep your comment to 3 minutes or less under state law, and unless otherwise permitted under the Ralph M. Brown Act. The merits of the matters presented under this item cannot be discussed or acted upon by the City Council at this time. For items appearing on the agenda, the public will be invited to make comments at the time the item comes up for council consideration. Upon being acknowledged by the mayor, begin by stating and spelling your name. Do we have anyone for general public comment? Do we have any written general public comments? I'll go ahead and open public comment.
No, Mayor Harvey, no email general
Great.
public comments at this time.
Thank you very much. Seeing no one raise their hand and having no written public comments, I'll go ahead and magic clap this closed and move directly on to meeting dedications. Do we have meeting dedications? None? Great. No presentations, so we'll move right on to consent calendar. Do we have any questions on the consent calendar from council or anything? Or should we, I lost my place here, I apologize. So we'll move on to consent calendar. All items considered on the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be acted upon by a single motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless members of council, staff, or public request items to be removed for separate action. At this time, the council may decide to change the order of the agenda. Would anybody like to change the order of the agenda? No? No questions from council? Great. We'll go ahead and open public comment on the consent calendar. It is open. Nobody has raised their hands. No written public comment, correct?
That is correct.
All right, we'll go ahead and close public comment on the consent calendar. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Oh,
Second.
a reverse of the previous motion and second, and we'll go ahead and go to a roll call vote.
Councilmember Cook,
Aye.
Councilmember Agrimonti,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Hundley,
Aye.
Mayor Harvey.
Absolutely. Let's do it. Yes. Moving on. Great. We're going right through this meeting. We'll go to item 5.1, public hearing. Hold a public hearing on appeals, 2 appeals, super fun, of 3 use permits / sites for Verizon Small Cell Facilities and commercial districts listed below. I'll turn it over to the city manager or the planning director, whoever's going to take it.
Thank you, Mayor Harvey. I'll start. Welcome, council and community. I'm going to give a brief update about this. We are here for an appeal, 2 appeals on Verizon use permits. I'm going to outline here the process so folks understand how the evening will flow, and then I will turn it to other staff. So the key staff will be involved in this is David Storr, our Planning Community Services Director, and John Abachi, who's our Assistant City Attorney. In addition, we have Lee Affenbach, who will be on the call as well, who is the city's telecommunications consultant and is available if there are technical questions as well. So first we'll have a staff report by staff providing an overview. There'll then be an opportunity for council to ask questions of staff and or the city consultant about the project. We will then open the public hearing on all 3 sites simultaneously, because there are 3 sites that are being considered and that were appealed. We will start with the applicant, Verizon and CBR Group, and the applicant will start. They are given 15 minutes for their presentation. They are able to share screen and provide any PowerPoint, etc. And they have 15 minutes for their total presentation. We will then allow council to ask any questions directly to the applicant. To be clear, the applicant is also an appellant, but just for the purposes of nomenclature, we will articulate and talk about Verizon as the applicant, but they are also an appellant. Then the other appellant is Lynn Marie DeVincent and Mark Mothaler. They also will be provided 15 minutes for a presentation. They also will be able to share their screen with Zoom and provide any presentation they would like to do. And then we'll do an opportunity for council questions. We will then move to public comment. And this will be an opportunity for each member of the public to provide comments. Generally, we provide 3 minutes. That can be reduced based on the number of participants, and that is at the discretion of the mayor. And again, as Mayor Harvey described, we will both do any written public comments that have been received and or verbal. We will then, after public comment, the public hearing still will be open and we will do a series of questions. If the mayor, council members may ask staff to respond if there were questions that came up, either from either of the appellants or the general public. Council members may also ask questions of staff or the city's consultant. And then we'll go to council member asking questions of the appellants. And then we'll go to questions of the applicant. And the one, because of the way the Zoom process is, it's not as easy in our regular chambers where people can step up quickly and in and out to the podium. Here we need to bring folks in and out. And so we would ask as we go through the questions, again, Mayor, this is your prerogative, this is staff's recommendation, to kind of sequence through the questions in this manner. After all the questions are answered, we would then advise the council to close a public hearing on all 3 sites. And then this would be an opportunity for council discussion. If there are other questions, then we would ask legal if we need to reopen the public hearing, and that would be a decision and to be considered by our legal staff. But again, once we close the public hearing, the plan would be for council to give discuss, and then for council to give direction. And then staff would be coming back at a future meeting with a resolution, basically institutionalizing and implementing the actions and direction of the city council. And we're looking at that coming back on June 29th. So that is the process. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen, and I will turn it to David Storer, our planning director, for him to provide an overview.
Thank you, Kathy. Mayor Harvey, council members, just want to make sure you can see my screen here. I'm going to try to make the PowerPoint a little bit prettier. And also, while that shows up, can everybody see that? Is that visible? I think I'm sharing my screen.
It is visible, yes.
Thank you. Wendy, just to confirm, is Lee Offenbach promoted to a speaker? I just want to make sure he's on the line. Wendy,
yes, he's been promoted. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Wendy. Mayor, council members, I'm going to try to describe in perhaps 10 minutes or so a 3-year process that the city has been involved with these 3 particular applications. At 30,000 feet going back, we've had 17 use permit requests filed by Verizon throughout the city. 7 of the 17 applications were subsequently withdrawn by Verizon, leaving us with 10 proposals, 7 which are residential and 3 commercial. Those are the subject of tonight's meeting. The city retained Lee Offenbach very early on in the process, who's been a guide and assistant to us throughout the process on the technical side of things with respect to electromagnetic frequencies and the like. And he'll be able to answer questions later on when it gets a little bit too tough for David. But anyway, the rules that we're reviewing right now for those 3 use permits relate to Section 5.32 of the Sonoma Municipal Code. Should the 7 residential sites come online or be reinitiated by Verizon, they will be processed according to our rules at the time with respect to Section 5.30 relative to how wireless telecommunication facilities are reviewed and processed. So going to our first slide tonight, you can see that the 3 locations are generally on 5th Street West area, 2nd Street West area, and McDonald, which would be between Broadway and 1st Street West. The numbers that I've used here in the presentation, 06, 07, and 012, relate to those initial 17 use permit requests. That was the numbering system that was used by Verizon. And we will refer to those tonight as we have throughout the last couple of years at the Planning Commission process. So in a nutshell, the Planning Commission has held 4 public meetings relating to the location of cell towers within the city. This is near Sonoma Market, 006. You can see there's a middle pole there with nothing on it other than some wires called an understory. And you can see that there's a proposed antenna on an existing pole with the support equipment. Now, I do want to point out what the support equipment is on this slide because it's easier to see it than some of the others that I'll provide later on. Inside, the proposed antenna is necessary for any installation for wireless service. That's going to be whether it's either mid-story like this or whether it's on the top of a pole, whether it's a wood pole or a street light pole that you'll see later on. The next piece of equipment are the radios that support the antenna. Below that, you'll see a service disconnect switch, which is basically a power on, power off, on or off switch. And you'll see that about 8 feet above ground as a general rule. There is a requirement they be distanced away from the radios. We'll get into that a little bit later on, perhaps. And then there's also a service meter that is also built into that rectangular canopy or proposed support equipment box, which is consistent with what you'll see throughout these next slides at 007.
Hey, David, sorry, this is Kathy for a second. If you're pointing out certain things, if you can use your mouse, you can help direct the public's attention and council's attention, because sometimes with the pictures, it's tougher. So if you could use your mouse a little bit, I think that might be helpful. Thank you.
Gotcha. Thank you, Kathy. So you can see here, I wasn't sure if my mouse was working, but it is. Here you can see the canister at site 007 on 2nd Street West, which is north of West Napa Street. Here you can see this is the corner of 1st Street West and McDonald, the existing tower, and then you'll see over here the proposed support equipment. It's kind of hard to see there because of the background of the tree. What I do want to point out here is that for the last slide that I just showed, 007 and 012, these will not be using existing poles. These will be net new poles at about 9 feet taller. You can kind of see this point right here that I'm showing is the same point here. This distance right here is actually elongated by an additional 9 feet or so. And certainly can ask the applicant to specify those dimensions if I've got that wrong. With respect to the design constraints, the antenna has to be out there, as I mentioned earlier. They do need radio equipment, or RRUs. You'll see that nomenclature throughout the information that you've seen that we talked about at the Planning Commission and also in your staff report. The radio is what supports the antenna. We also have, again, as I mentioned, the electrical service disconnect switch. And according to PG&E, that has to be on the exterior of the pole. There's no question about that. Where there is a question is how you provide the service power meter. That can be built within the shroud of the antenna. And in the case of these most recent submittals, you'll see that being done. And we do want to point out later on that the equipment that you'll see on the exterior of a pole or on inside a pole, regardless of that, there are constraints placed by the CPUC, the California Public Utilities Commission, under a general order that talks about the relationship between all of the pieces of the equipment. So at the last Planning Commission meeting in January, which is the subject of our appeals tonight, the proposal that was reviewed by the Planning Commission, and I've used the 5th Street West location right here on this one. This is where you'll see next to the US Bank off to the right here. You can see that the service disconnect switch has been shielded by a no parking sign. And you can see that the radios are located very close to the armature of the light. And then there you can see the antenna, which is about a 2 to 3 foot antenna, which also includes the power meter. Moving over to the center slide, this is on the south side of 2nd Street West, just north of Best Western. You can see here that the service disconnect has been shielded again by a no parking sign, again with the radios mounted just below the light armature. I'll talk about this particular light standard here, which is on private property, a little bit later. Actually, I'll do it now. One of the conditions of approval for this particular location is a condition number 17. I will point out that all of these 3 sites that you see here were approved with each of their own independent resolutions by the Planning Commission. All of them had the same first 16 conditions of approval. At the meeting, condition 17 was added here, such that if the applicant was able to talk with the property owner here, and if the property owner was willing, they'd be willing to pay for the removal of this particular light standard. Again, these light standards are being placed in locations where light would be a benefit to the city and not in the locations that were proposed for the wood pole signs, with the exception of the one at McDonald Street. Again, here on McDonald Street, the location is shifted just very slightly to the south side, mid-block. And again, you can see the service disconnect hidden by a 3-hour parking sign. And this was the proposal that you saw with the radio just slightly below the lighting armature. Subsequent to the appeal, Verizon has provided additional simulations that embrace some of the comments and discussion that the Planning Commission had. These particular simulations have not been viewed by the Planning Commission. We as staff have just received them in the latest communication with the applicant. You can see here that the service disconnect switch would be behind this crossing sign, and the radios have been shielded by this additional signage. You can see that the radios have been moved to a midpoint of the pole almost. This distance here below the sign is about 8 feet, maybe just a little bit more. Again, as you go to the 2nd Street West signage, you can see it's left turn, right turn, straight through, again, hiding the radios somewhat mid-pole. And again, the service disconnect in this location. To the McDonald Street, you see the same feature with the radios being shielded along with the service disconnect switch being shown. Staff has consistently requested that Verizon minimize the visibility of the radios and other equipment to the extent that's possible. And the applicant has also consistently stated that undergrounding the vaulting would not be feasible for the radios. And that's really the discussion at hand. The applicant has provided their justification for not undergrounding that you saw in your binders, and that was just recently presented to you. In short, we've seen a variety, many designs on existing, which range from existing wood poles to new metal street lights with the equipment on the outside of the pole or inside the pole. Some have had the radios in a base, a cylindrical base or a rectangular base, which would be anywhere from 18 to 24 inches in diameter, as tall as 6 feet tall in some cases. And I think the preference of the Planning Commission was that that not be the case, that those radios would be better served if they were on the exterior of the pole with some form of shielding. There, as I mentioned, there are minor variations in the locations from the original sites, but generally in the same proximity, which would then benefit the city with respect to providing street lighted features. All of the proposals have been reviewed by our consultant and staff for consistency with the FCC regulations relating to human exposure, and all have been found to comply with that criterion. Some, I believe for the most part, all of them are less than 5% of the FCC's regulations. And we've also built conditions of approval into the conditions of the Planning Commission approved that will serve the city with respect to any increases beyond the FCC limits, which would not be allowed, and that there would be a reporting procedure on an annual basis to provide the city with a status update, if you will, on the electromagnetic frequency. As I said earlier, there are actually two appeals. Verizon, the applicant, appealed a condition number 1 and condition number 16. Condition number 1 is the condition of the Planning Commission that required the undergrounding of the radios, not placing them in the mid location of those poles, as has been presented recently by Verizon. And also condition number 16 that relates to the ability to add additional power to the use permits for those particular radios, such that if there was a 25% increase in effective radiated power, that would require another visit to the Planning Commission, which would basically in essence say that if there's any increase beyond 4G, that would require a conditional use permit or a use permit application. Staff has reviewed that particular condition with the FCC's ruling and agrees to recommend to your council that condition number 16 be deleted from the any future resolution should the council wish to approve as modified. The second appeal that we have tonight is from Lynn Marie DeVincent and Mark Martheller, who have requested denial of all 3 use permits regardless of any conditions of approval. I'll now turn the time over to Mr. Abachi to go through the issues and the findings under the municipal code and federal law standards.
For the council tonight is to consider the following issues. The first has to do with the findings for a wireless use permit to be approved under the municipal code. That's under chapter 5.32, as Mr. Storer explained. Those findings are set forth in the supplemental staff report. A summary of those taken down to their base is number 1, that each of the sites would be a most feasible site. Number 2, that they've minimized visibility in the number of facilities in the applications that are before you. Number 3, that there is visual compatibility to minimize the impacts to the extent that it's feasible for each of the applications before you. Number 4, that the application is compliant with the FCC RF emissions standard. And we have received information from Lee Oplerbach, the city's technical consultant, that makes it clear that the RF emissions standard, the applications are in compliance with the FCC RF emissions standard. The next finding is that the building design blends into the environment to the extent feasible, including facilities located in an underground vault if possible. The next standard is that the applications be consistent with the general plan and zoning. The next standard is that the decision must comply with the federal law standard, and we include that because the decision that the council would make tonight would need to comply with the federal law standard, which is under the FCC order. Under the FCC order, an aesthetic requirement, including undergrounding, must be technically feasible and directed at the unsightliness or out of character design. And number two, a decision must not materially inhibit wireless service. That would include expansion of services provided and improvement in existing services. The decision must not materially inhibit either of those. Number three would be that the decision may not be based on the effects of RF emissions to the extent that it complies with the FCC standard as we covered above. Number four would be that the FCC order, and this is a point to be made tonight, replaces the earlier significant gap in service coverage standard. The FCC order does not allow the city to deny the application on the basis of no significant gap in coverage. The standard stated here is the standard that is currently in place under the law, under the FCC order. So those are the issues for the council tonight. There are other issues that are raised in the appellant's materials. However, these really are the parameters for the council's consideration tonight.
Thank you, John. So tonight the council may provide direction to the staff to prepare resolutions to either affirm in part, deny or deny in part each of the two proposals on the appeals. It is a de novo hearing. That means it's an all new hearing, and we do need to have action by June 30th. So tonight, hopefully we can receive your council's direction in order to prepare those resolutions to return. Looks like we'll make the deadline by a day unless we can have some time from Verizon to go longer than the 8th Amendment that we've signed with them. So this concludes staff report. Happy to receive any questions and turn it over to you, Mr. Mayor. And I'll try to get out of my stuff sharing there.
I believe in your ability to do that. Thank you so much. I appreciate all the work you put into this, David and John, and I appreciate the staff report. This has been a long process. It's gone through our planning commission, and I know we've spent a lot of time on this, and I just want to thank you all for the work that you put into it. I greatly appreciate it. Do we have, somebody's just got a picture of their router now on the screen. It's kind of, oh, okay, this is our consultant, huh? Great. Do we have questions from council? I'm seeing none. Okay, great. Seeing no questions from council, I'll go ahead and bring it out for public comment.
Mayor Harvey, I think if anyone who's not speaking, if you could please mute your system. We're getting some background noise.
That was probably me. I was receiving potatoes. Okay. Great. So we'll go ahead and go to, so are we going to public comment now, or are we going to the appellant and the applicant and appellant process?
At this point, Mayor Harvey, good.
I'm sorry. So Mr. Mayor, we will be opening the public hearing on each of the three applications. They would be proceeding simultaneously.
Great, thank you. These are spicy potatoes. We will go to public comment, and I'll go ahead and open that. So again, just to reiterate, if you're calling in, you can dial *9 to raise your hand in the Zoom chat that we have here. And if you submitted written public comment, I will go that way. If not, and you're just on Zoom, go ahead and raise your hand, and we will acknowledge you and bring you in for public comment, and we will go ahead and open that right now.
Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, at the first step of the public hearing will be for the applicant, which is Verizon, to give their 15-minute presentation.
Wonderful. So we'll go with the applicant then. So who is this?
So if our acting city clerk can promote folks, anyone on that with Verizon or CBR can raise their hands. and to note that they need to be promoted so that they can join the conversation.
Yes, we're doing that as you speak.
Hi, this is Mark Peters. Before our time starts, if I could just ask a technical question. We have a presentation that I'll be presenting, and then we have 3 speakers as part of our panel, which is myself, Chris Villegas, and Paul Albritton. Can they be joined as panelists at the same time so they can speak over the presentation as well?
Yes, they can be.
And they have been promoted to panelists.
All right. Are we ready to go?
I believe so. Sharing my screen. Chris, are you on? Chris Villegas? Don't
Just
think we have.
promoted him. Chris is there now.
I don't think we can hear him.
Just a quick question for you, Wendy and Latanya. Will you be giving Mark here a 3-minute warning so that we can help facilitate his comments?
They have a 15-minute time, right? Okay.
They have 15
Yes.
minutes. I think typically we've allowed a 3-minute warning or a 5-minute warning, whatever is the preference of the council.
Yeah, 3-minute warning is fine. Do we have the whole family plan here?
I think that I don't hear Chris Villegas' voice, and he's leading off our presentation.
I see him here. I can't hear him. He's just sent a message
we
in the
have-
chat saying, "Can you hear me?" And I cannot.
Says we have Christine, not Chris Villegas.
But I
is
see
in the
Chris
chat.
Villegas' name here.
Can you hear Paul Albritton?
I
Yes.
can.
Okay, it's
Paul.
Chris Villegas, not Christy Beltran.
Yeah, we have Chris Villegas as a member of the panelist group.
Thank you.
Chris, is your microphone working? You seem to have a baby. Or a bird.
We appreciate your patience.
Mr. Peters, one thing, if Chris Villegas is not able to get in, what we've done is a workaround in the past. If you are going to share the presentation, then he could call in and just use the phone and participate via the phone, which is another
Okay.
way versus the video.
Can you see his phone number? His mobile number, I believe, is
I can call in.
He can call in directly.
I see 2 phone numbers in the chat or in the attendees list. We have a 707-3464 and we have a 925-222-0888.
that's his mobile number, the 925-222-0888.
If we could just bring that mobile number in maybe, and then we'll have Chris Villegas will be in 3 times and maybe we can hear him.
Hi there.
Do we hear him?
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Now
do.
we can. Okay.
Oh,
think we are
good.
ready.
Sorry
to,
about that. Thank you
begin.
guys. I had some technical difficulties. I apologize. Good evening, Mayor Harvey and council members. My name is Chris Villegas. I am the North Bay Community Outreach Specialist for Verizon Wireless, and our team is here tonight as well. We appreciate the opportunity to connect virtually this evening. I will be going through the project overview of our outreach efforts, and then Mark Peters from the CDR group will discuss the design evolution. Then Paul Albritton, our outside legal counsel, will provide an overview of the legal framework related to the sites that are before you today. Additionally, Bill Hemmett from Hemmett and Edison is available to answer any questions that may arise relating to radio frequency emissions. And then Mark, if you could switch to the next slide, please. So I would like to begin by providing an overview of our engagement with the community. We've heard from the community, city staff, and elected officials about the need for more information surrounding the project. Based on that feedback, we launched several community outreach efforts aimed at providing education about small cells and getting information to the public. Next slide, please. The first strategy that we implemented was the launch of a Verizon educational website specific to Sonoma. The website provides a place for residents to receive educational information regarding small cells and learn about how the project will impact and benefit their community. The website also allows residents to reach out to Verizon with any specific questions. Additionally, the website provides resources beyond Verizon for those interested in learning more. Second, we launched a direct mail campaign where we mailed postcards to residents and businesses within a 500-foot radius of the 3 proposed small cell locations. The mailer went out on April 28th and was sent to over 283 addresses. The mailer directed recipients to our educational website and provided statistics which highlight why we are expanding the network. Most recently, we've launched a text message campaign which surveyed existing Verizon wireless customers. The message was sent on June 1st, 2020, and asked recipients to reply yes to a text to show support for improved wireless service in Sonoma. Recipients were also given the option to reply with a personalized text in support of the project and were provided a link to the website that Verizon created specific to this project. Through this effort, we received an overwhelmingly positive response in support of this project. In fact, 94% of the respondents were in support of the project, while only 6% were opposed. In conclusion, Verizon has invested over 4 years on working with city staff, residents, and the Planning Commission to get the 3 nodes that are before you today approved. Your approval this evening will allow Verizon to start addressing the capacity demands on the network. We believe that through our efforts in community outreach, there is overwhelmingly support for this project. I will now hand off to our member CBR to discuss the evolution of the small cell design in the city of Sonoma.
I just want to chime in here. I'm not sure who has either like some sort of band or like there's a lot of background noise that's going on here. So if we can mute our microphones if we're not speaking, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chris. My name is Mark Peters. I'm with the CBR group representing Verizon as the applicant for the 3 4G, not 5G site designs proposed in the public right-of-way in commercial areas in Sonoma. We're here today to request that the condition of vaulting be removed. I have a lot of information to go through. I apologize if I'm going quickly, but I want to go through quite a bit of information. 3 years ago, we submitted the initial design to Sonoma on a wood utility pole and have worked with staff and community feedback to arrive at our current design that was approved by the Planning Commission. In between, we have responded to Sonoma staff and Planning Commission design recommendations and have made dozens of design revisions for each of the 3 locations. Some of these changes include relocation of the original 3 to places where staff and the commission felt were better suited. We moved further away from residences, and we arrived at the slimmest form factor that still achieves the network objectives that Verizon is using today. This is Sonoma 6 that we're looking at, and a selection of the design configurations that we have responded to with staff and the commission. This is for Sonoma 7. This is the same for Sonoma 12. And I'm happy to come back to any of this and answer any questions afterwards. This is a simplified view of our elevation of the design that was approved by the Planning Commission. This has the antenna at the top of the pole, and as David Storr described, the remote radio unit near the top of the luminaire arm, and the disconnect hidden behind a sign below. In some of the photosims that we're showing you today, we have this design, which shows the RU proposed behind a shielded from traffic with a traffic sign. Just as a side note, it's going to be relevant later, is that the RRU, the proposed radio unit, is the only item on this schematic that would be included inside a vault. Everything else that you see would be on the pole. This is the site view at Sonoma 6. And these are some updated photosims, similar to what David showed earlier, which we think is the best winning design that we've come up with yet. Here is the site location at 7 and the photosim showing those designs. And then Sonoma 12 with the same. This is a photo simulation of what the site would look like with the underground vault. Vaulting has been a topic that was introduced by Sonoma planning staff that we spent considerable time and energy evaluating. Underground service vaults introduce unnecessary reliability issues in wireless sites. The radios used in Northern California and much of the rest of the nation by Verizon are manufactured by Ericsson. Verizon chooses Ericsson as a radio vendor as their products are reliable, robust, and have technological, high technological performance. These radios that Ericsson manufactures are not designed to be placed in subterranean or underground environments. CBR Group in 2018 provided a 15-page analysis, which is in your packet, I believe, to the staff at the request of staff to address the issue of vaulting. And there's a lot of information in there that that talks about why vaulting is not really a feasible option for Verizon. Some of the things that we've done even since that report has been created was we reached out to PG&E and found just in one location, the West 5th Street and Napa Road, last year it lost power 3 times. In the last 5 years, it was lost on an average of 3 to 5 times per year, which doesn't include any planned outages. Every one of these outages is an opportunity for the sump pumps and or the fans to fail in these vaults. The pumps are required to prevent flooding, and the fans are required to prevent overheating of the radios. There's a belief that Verizon's objections to underground vaults are based on cost. I will tell you that that's not true, that in some of the designs that I showed you earlier, that the Planning Commission had a preference for, which we provided the designs, they're like preference I and H for integrated pole designs. Those integrated pole systems are as expensive as vaults. Also, we reached out to Ericsson's technical sales support, Joji Phillip with Ericsson North America, and he had the following statement. All of our radios are designed to go in open air environments above ground, and most are not IP68 rated. They are not designed to be put into underground vaults, since such vaults typically have no environmental control and are prone to flooding. There would be concerns about the high moisture content in the air, the lack of ventilation for cooling, etc. Hence, if placed in such environments, will not be covered in our warranty. Lee Afflerbach, at the request of CTC, at the request of Sonoma, provided feedback on these vaults and provided a vault manufacturer in response to our vaulting analysis that solved or appeared to solve some of the issues. I also want to note that at the end of his statement about this, please note that our evaluation of these sites has been focused on radio technology. We do not generally address construction issues associated with civil mechanical engineering expertise. Over the past 3 years, we have reviewed several hundred small cell applications designed for Verizon, AT&T, and Sprint. Only one of the applications was designed with the vault housing of the radio equipment. Why vaulting is not feasible. Ericsson radios are not designed for underground use. Ericsson will not warranty the radios placed in vaults. Pumps and fans cause noise and are points of failure that can cause a site to go down. Specific to the Sendeo Vault, in 2019, Jerry Bascom, a registered professional engineer of the state of California, evaluated the product, spoke to the manufacturer, and reported that it was not feasible for Verizon. A few of his comments, and he had a much longer list of comments, are sites built to date. They've only built 5 using this vault to date. There's not enough to evaluate the reliability of a design that's expected to last 10 to 20 years. It still has fans inside of it, which is a potential for failure. It is size limiting. And then the most important thing is it's required this geothermal cooling loop. This is a big issue for Verizon. To cool the vault, Syndeo's design requires drilling, and we contacted them and asked them how deep this pipe should be. And it's not to scale in this depiction I'm showing you in front of you. They're saying it requires 100, on average, 180 feet of depth to pump antifreeze through aquifer depths for Sonoma to keep the vault cool. For Verizon, this contains too much environmental risk and is thus infeasible. These are the reasons why we're asking you today to remove condition number 1, the requirement to use ground vaults from our planning approval of all 3 commercial sites in Sonoma. And at this point, I'm going to end my presentation and turn it over to Paul Albritton, counsel to Verizon.
Thank you, Mark. Mayor Harvey, members of the council, you can hear me, I hope?
We can hear you, Paul.
Great, thank you. I want to address the appellant's issues very quickly. In doing so, I want to quickly review the federal law. I thank John for running through the federal law with you already. Essentially, you know that the federal law prevents you from making decisions that would prohibit service, that your decisions have to be based on substantial evidence.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. That's your 3-minute time.
Thank you. Your decision must be based on substantial evidence, that it can't be based on the environmental effects of radio frequency emissions, and that extends to any denial based on an alleged depreciation in property value based on radio frequency emissions. And finally, I wanted to mention state law 7901, which provides telephone corporations like Verizon Wireless the right to place their facilities in the right-of-way, subject to your aesthetic review. Quickly then to the appellant's points, she claims that there's no significant gap. Your expert has said that 3/4 of Verizon Wireless's network, its AWS and PCS bands, are not available in downtown Sonoma. So right now, Verizon is running on 1 of 4 cylinders. And it's clearly a gap in Verizon Wireless's service, even though, as your attorney just pointed out, we only need to show a material imposition, not a gap. The appellant also claims that the aesthetic effects of these light standards would cause property value depreciation, and they incommode the right-of-way. We think these light standards at 33 feet each high, which is a question I know that came up, are like every other light standard in Sonoma, and that they don't create aesthetic impacts that are incommode the right-of-way, and that they don't reduce property values. With respect to vaulting, Verizon Wireless considers them to be infeasible in that way because they affect the reliability of our network, would cause a prohibition of service in the event that we were required to vault our facilities. So we don't think there's any substantial evidence provided by the appellant to show that there are these aesthetic impacts, that they somehow affect, incommode the right-of-way in any way other than just like every other light standard, except for those antennas and radios. And to the extent that it's based on a fear of RF emissions, that kind of denial is tantamount to denying based on RF emissions. We provided you the FCC report to show that we apply. Bill Hammond of Hammond and Edison is online in the event you have any questions about the radio emissions. Verizon has tried to work mutually with the city over the last 2 years to come up with designs that work with the city. We've come a long way from the utility pole proposals that we have had in the past. We have the outstanding residential applications, and I can suggest some conditions of approval related to that during question and answer that might assist you with your decisions. That's my presentation for this evening, and we look forward to answering all your questions. Did I make my 3 minutes?
You sure did.
Thank you.
Great. Appreciate it. Are we moving on to the, are we moving on to the appellant or the appellant now, or are we having questions of council?
Mayor Harvey, the next step now would be questions the council may have of the applicant.
Great. Do we have questions for the applicant?
I do. This is Madeline.
Madeline, go right ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for your presentation. I appreciate, I don't know how you keep it within, you must have been practicing this forever. I don't blame you, but I wanted to ask at the lowest point of this poll, all it keeps saying is proposed new disconnect. I don't even know, I can't relate to what that means. I know our city attorney shared that with me, but it's whatever it is at the lowest point of the poll. Could somebody share what that is?
I can explain that.
Okay.
The disconnect is an electrical disconnect. It's a handle that is mounted on a box, and it electrically disconnects the radio from its electrical power source. And it is required by PG&E. PG&E has a standard that they have sent a bulletin out that shows it, and PG&E specifies on metal poles exactly how high it has to be no lower than 8 feet, no higher than 10 feet on the pole, and it must be accessible. And part of that is for safety reasons, so that it can be disconnected electrically.
Okay. So, and would that also apply if there were wooden poles the same height?
Yes, there is a disconnect required on wooden poles as well.
Okay. So the only reason I'm mentioning this, it doesn't seem to be that high. So it seems to be an attractive nuisance. That's just the way I look at it. I don't know, I have no idea why somebody would want to wreck it, but it just seems to be kind of low. It's like asking for a problem, but I'm sure you all have figured that out, but I just wanted to mention that.
The reason why it's mounted low is so that it actually is accessible by workers. They want it 8 feet, so it's out of the reach of normal people standing there without like a step ladder. And then with the step ladder, it can be reached by a worker.
Okay, well, I trust that you believe that. Okay.
That's PG&E's direction to us. So.
Right.
That's actually state law.
Well, okie dokie. Thanks. I'm just asking the question. We have a lot of energetic people in this world.
We know how to jump in Sonoma, is what Madeline's saying.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madeline. I appreciate it, Councilmember Agrimonti. Vice Mayor Hundley, it looks like you got a question charged up, ready to go. Go for it.
I do have a question. So it seems like y'all put a lot of thought into the design and trying to make something that's better than the alternative. So my question is why the threat has been made that if we don't give you what you want today, then you're gonna end up going back to wood poles.
This is Paul Albritton. I think I can answer that. We have tried very, very hard to work collaboratively with the city, really over 2 years on this design. And we've worked with other cities very successfully on a collaborative manner. Napa, Sunnyvale, San Francisco, Sacramento, I can go on. And we end up in this collaboration where we have facilities that are much better for the community, but provide our service. In other jurisdictions where we've met a brick wall and the councils and the cities have been unable to work with us, then we've moved forward with our utility pole installations. And unfortunately, we've ended up in litigation, and we've been successful in that litigation, and we've been able to move forward, putting our facilities up in that aggressive manner. Our preference with Sonoma clearly is, and we've spent, I think, a very patient 2 years getting to this point, meeting planning commissions, committee of the planning commission. I've been there many, many times to your beautiful city hall and your planning building. And so we're at that point now. We've extended the shot clock so many times that it's not a threat. It's really just a reality.
I'm wondering why is that a reality? Like what causes that shift?
I don't know of any other jurisdiction where we've taken 2 years to get to this point. Our shot clock on these applications is 60 days, 90 days for a new pole. And so we feel we've really hit the point where we've hit the stride. We've hit a beautiful design with a radio hidden behind a street sign. And that if this is denied, I don't know where we go from there. And so it's not a threat, I think. It's just really where we go from here.
No, it is though, because you've brought up wood poles. I'm just wondering, like, why would it switch from these, designs that you all seem quite proud of, and that, like, if we don't go for it, then it's going to be a tall wood pole.
That's a really good question.
That was my original question.
Well, and putting up these poles actually costs us about 5 times as much as it does to put it on a wooden pole. The wooden pole is available to us under state laws. I mentioned Section 7901 of the Public Utility Code allows telephone corporations to put telephone equipment on telephone poles, except subject to your aesthetic review. And so we really, from the beginning, could have pushed that approach. But we heard from the community, we heard from you, and we wanted to move forward in this way. And I have to say that we have, I think there were 24 different designs. Maybe Mark will correct me, there are 27 different designs. Our preference is to work with you to come up with a design that works, which I think we came up with. And it is more that we don't know where else to go from here, I guess is the best way to put it.
Got it. And so you just explained that you all use one particular manufacturer for your cell towers. Does Verizon only use that one, or are there other manufacturers that are also used?
There are many manufacturers of structures that we use, and I'm not sure where we've actually proposed structures by multiple manufacturers up to this point process.
I'm talking about the equipment itself.
Yes, the equipment. The Ericsson equipment is not the tower; it's radio equipment, and carriers take great time and care from their radio engineering departments to select those vendors that do that. I would think that Ericsson right now has most of the market share across most of the carriers across most of the country as far as radio equipment in the U.S. They make very good products, and that's why they get a lot of sales. There are some other manufacturers, even like Waive from outside the country, which the federal government, is happy about people, carriers utilizing. I don't know if that helps.
So is it only the one manufacturer, or does Verizon have they sourced from other manufacturers?
They have sourced from Samsung on a trial for 5G in Northern California, but I don't think they use Samsung equipment anywhere in California that I'm aware of.
The rest of the country,
I don't think they use very much Samsung equipment. AT&T and Verizon, my experience, I've been doing this for almost 26, 28 years now, and most of the carriers use Ericsson equipment.
Paul Albritton here. In my 30 years of experience, we have Samsung, Nokia, Ericsson, possibly Huawei, but it's a very limited group, and they're building radios for an international market, most of which has less aesthetic concerns than the United States. So in China and India and elsewhere where they're building out networks, they're building the radios for those groups. And so we have to work hard in order to try and get a design like this radio, the 4455, 30 inches tall, 11 inches wide, 6 inches deep, designed to go on a pole. It is passively cooled so that no fans are required. It makes absolutely no noise. And it was selected by Verizon, who tries to have a consistency of equipment throughout the country for every number of maintenance and operation reasons for their wireless networks. There is no smaller radio that can provide the performance that this radio is providing.
So you use, if I may, Councilmember Cook, did you have any questions?
No, I've read so much from the packets. I think I have throw it on here. It was big, but I did want to just kind of talk about a little bit what Vice Mayor Hundley talked about, the threat for the the power poles. So where would be the closest installation to Sonoma that exists right now that you're proposing for the city of Sonoma?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Paul.
Can you repeat the question?
Where's the closest that you have 4G or 5G, the same as what you're proposing for Sonoma?
Small cells?
Yes.
I'll let Mark answer that question, but I believe it's Napa. Is that right, Mark?
Yeah, Napa. There's some in Napa County, and we have some in Sonoma County just outside of town.
And can we talk about how long of a distance do you have at those sites?
So you mean, I'm trying to understand your question correctly before I just answer quickly.
Yeah, I guess the distance, we were talking about, 5th Street West and then what we have going over on the other sites. Is that the same as what's going on in Napa?
Yeah, so you're talking about the distance from one small cell to another?
Yes.
Yeah, I would even say that as compared to many of the other deployments that we're working on, the ones in Sonoma are further apart from each other. Small cells these types, of course, it depends on the height. If the higher up the antenna is, the farther the signal can propagate. These are very low power installations in small cells. So compared to a macro site, they don't project a long distance at all. And as a matter of fact, by radius, the types of facilities that we're talking about are usable generally out 1,000, 1,500 feet in radius.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Oh yeah. So it was stated during your presentation that you predominantly use Ericsson radios. Is that correct?
That's correct. There are some Samsung radios used by Verizon in Northern California, like in Sacramento. They're all 5G radios though. This is a 4G installation. The only 4G equipment that I'm aware of is Ericsson equipment in California.
Mm-hmm. And so Verizon would be aware of kind of the newest technology that's available through the Ericsson Corporation, I would assume.
They are. Ericsson has a lot of products. There is a long list of criteria that they use to choose these products based on frequency, radio output, et cetera. The ones that are proposed for this are very common throughout Northern California.
So I'm wondering, are you aware of the Ericsson New Vault Radio 2268?
I apologize. Somebody's knocked at my door. My dog's barking. I am familiar of a low wattage. I'm trying to keep the dog quiet at the same time that I talk. I apologize. There is a low wattage radio that Ericsson produces that uses a manhole cover. Could you quiet her down, please? As the antenna, and the radio goes in the vault.
Yeah. Why? So I'm looking. It took me a quick Google search to find this. It seems like Ericsson, which is the company that you predominantly use with, produces a vault radio, the 2268. One of the things it says is the new vault radio enables operators and cities to place radios in existing underground vaults with fiber and power infrastructure connected to the antenna at ground level. This allows for fast permit process and deployment while ensuring no visual impact to the street environment. That's the advertisement around it. Why are these not considered?
I can answer that question. I'm familiar with the product. So notice that it says the antenna at ground level. The actual antenna is a replacement to a manhole cover. So these are appropriate for use in places like downtown areas where you have huge pedestrian traffic and you're trying to project antenna signal in a matter of maybe 100 feet, at most, maybe 200 feet. And they go into small vaults and they are IP68 rated, but they are also super low wattage. They are not appropriate for this installation because they don't have the same power output as our current radios.
I thought the ones we were installing in Sonoma were low wattage.
They are low power models. They're 20 watt radios. These radios that you're talking about, I think, are 4 watts. Wattages on macro towers are 40 to 80 watt radios, and you might have as many as 20 or 30 of those 40 to 80 watt radios on a macro tower. So when we talk about power, there's a scale or a continuum of output power. The ones that are designed, the 2268 radio is designed to project kind of like a indoor Wi-Fi antenna, a very limited space, and it's designed to be hooked up to an antenna literally on the ground in a manhole cover and cover the space between buildings outdoors like high-rise buildings. It is a different form factor product.
Yeah, Paul Longbritton here. If you look at the video on that radio, which has actually been out for a while, they show an example of its use in Bern, Switzerland, in a large plaza where the RF emissions are coming out of a manhole. very low wattage. It's based on having antennas very close to antennas because of the line loss, and then broadcasting actually from the ground. And that is not the service that we're trying to provide in Sonoma. It would require many manholes and a lot of digging to provide the service that we would be getting from the 20-watt radios that have a gain from the antennas. Mm-hmm. And we would not redesign our network that way.
But you could. Okay. Do you have other questions for council? No? Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And we'll go ahead and move on to, so we're going to go do the appellant. All right.
Correct. So at this point, Wendy, you'll pull Verizon parties back out and bring in the Lynn Marie and Mark Monthaler.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can we take a 2-minute break during this switch through?
We absolutely can, Vice Mayor. Let's go ahead and do that.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Great. And Wendy, you're ready to give the 3-minute warning?
I sure am.
All right, great. So Lynn, whenever you can't hear me, Lynn? I can't hear you though. You need to unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you.
All right,
Sorry.
great.
I thought you were, go ahead.
Yeah, so whenever you're ready, Lynn, go ahead and we'll start the time whenever you start talking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mary Harvey, council and staff. I want to begin by acknowledging everyone in the Sonoma community and our neighbors in the Bay Area who have helped create this campaign. We have a petition with over 300 names on it, as well as a letter from 23 businesses who have signed a letter in opposition of these cell towers. We acknowledge Verizon's efforts to demonstrate the value of their product and have always sought to ensure that their applications be addressed in a manner which does not violate the Telecommunications Act of 1996, and we believe we have accomplished this. Regarding the Planning Commission's decision, we support the requirement of condition number 1, undergrounding the equipment. And I wanted to just read a quote from a November 8th, 2018 Planning Commission meeting in which Mr. Albritton, in response to a question about why wouldn't they want to vault, quote, "I think you know the impediment to undergrounding, expense and money." I thank Mark Marthaler for his hours of reviewing these Planning Commission videos. Also, I happen to know that the city of Seaside, which recently settled with Verizon, and the city council denied the permits, and that took 4 years. And so Mr. Albrighton, again, is mistaken. There have been other cities that have taken longer than 2 years. For the record, I wanted to touch briefly on the staff's report's description of our appeal, page 9, final paragraph, that our community's submission to the 4 public meetings for the use permits provided no information to the commission to demonstrate how the public would be incommoded as a result of the placement of the 3 wireless facilities, other than to statements that related to the distressing nature of harmful radio frequency emissions. We learned early on that bringing forward discussion of any health matters would compromise our campaign. We adhered to that focus to the extent within our control. Our recollection is that we contributed to every aspect of incommoding the public, from land use objections in the commercial and residential zones, such that the original tower locations have been relocated several times, including the one next to Pharmaca and St. Francis. We have discussed aesthetics and demonstrated with Mark Marthaler's exceptional visual aids the ugliness, deception, and inappropriate nature of these towers for our town. We have discussed the municipal code, and in fact, with the city council's help, we initiated an urgent ordinance which resulted in the new, stronger ordinance that's now in place. We have discussed and contributed to every single aspect of the 3 arguments to deny the permits. To say otherwise is incorrect. Our appeal addresses incommoding the public as a legal and valid reason to deny the towers. This includes noise, safety concerns, aesthetics, and adverse effects on nearby properties. Additionally, I would like to submit to the council that the claim of no significant gap in coverage should be recognized as a valid reason to deny the permits. The presentation I'm making will give detailed reference to that. I represent many Sonoma neighbors, homeowners, parents, teachers, school children, business and property owners, renters, seniors, employers, and employees. We all share one thing in common. We want you to deny these 3 applications. This memorandum contains 3 irrefutable reasons for you to uphold our community appeal. We hope your decisions are based on one thing, ensuring the public good. This takes vision and strategy. You have the vision, the memorandum provides the strategy. Andrew Campanelli, one of the best tech attorneys in the country, agreed to help us, and the results are stunning. I will be addressing a selection of points from the memorandum. Point number 1. It is beyond dispute that the facilities which Verizon seeks to install at sites 006, 7, and 12 are not necessary for Verizon to provide wireless services within the city. Verizon's own website data conclusively establishes that it does not suffer from service gaps at the precise locations where it seeks to install these small cells. Proof positive from Verizon's own website on June 2nd map of excellent coverage. That map is Exhibit A in your memorandum. Verizon has wholly failed to provide any credible evidence to establish that there is a need for the proposed facilities or that there would be any public benefit to be derived from the construction of them. The three most common forms of credible evidence are 1, drive test results, 2, RF engineer reports with drop call data, 3, drop call records, and these studies address gaps in coverage as well as capacity. Verizon has not supplied any of this evidence. Why? Because their own website shows improved coverage is not needed. There are no gaps in service. There is no public benefit to be derived from these installations. So what did Verizon provide? Maps. Maps not based on any hard data recorded from any actual drive test. They manipulated the data to reach their predetermined conclusion that Verizon needs these small cells. The city of Sonoma has spent considerable money on a top expert to do all the right tests, and the results specifically quote from page 9, our signal intensity measurements confirm that Verizon's existing network delivers a signal level that is mostly adequate to support a high level of connectivity and service, end quote. The results of the drive test, quote, on the day on which the testing was conducted, we experienced no disconnects and no interruption in the connection to the 4 LTE network service, page 10. Since Verizon has wholly failed to provide documentation that demonstrates the public necessity of these wireless telecommunication facilities at the locations proposed, Verizon's applications for use permits should be denied as a matter of law. Point 3. Verizon's applications must be denied because the proposed facilities would inflict the exact types of adverse impacts which the City of Sonoma's own municipal code was specifically enacted to prevent. The intent behind the provisions pertaining to wireless telecommunication facilities was to protect the city, its communities, and the residents against the adverse impacts which irresponsibly placed wireless facilities would inflict upon the communities and properties within the city. Here's what our beautiful municipal code says. Purpose, quote, the regulations contained herein are designed to protect and promote public health, safety, community welfare, and the aesthetic quality of Sonoma, Heart Sonoma. And, quote, to ensure against the creation of visual blight within or along the city's scenic corridors. Now, who would this be important to? Verizon? No. How about our neighbors and friends, families who live in this town? How about those folks who own properties, businesses, and live workspaces that are close to these proposed installations? Remember, your decision today should be based on ensuring the public good. Mark Marthal and I have met with many property owners who all opposed a tower next to their property. We have letters from each proposed site near the yoga community and Sasserini Elementary School, near the Sonoma Conservatory of Dance and other small businesses, and near the Best Western Lodge. And here's the irony, or maybe it's a tragedy. All of the adverse aesthetic impacts which the proposed wireless facilities would inflict upon the community are entirely unnecessary because Verizon does not need the proposed facilities to provide wireless services within the city. Finally, over the 2 years of meetings with Verizon, they have dismissed our concerns about loss in property values. They said, that's a non-issue. Well, apparently they were mistaken. We are informed that across the entire United States, both real estate appraisers and brokers have rendered professional opinions which support common sense. When wireless facilities are installed close to properties, their value goes down, anywhere from 5 to 20%. Federal courts recognize that it's perfectly proper for a local zoning authority to accept this direct evidence of the reduction of property values from the professional licensed real estate brokers. In this memorandum are 4 letters from our local Sonoma real estate professionals with outstanding credentials who express their concerns about this potential loss in property value. Point number 5, page 18. While applicants are quick to point out the finite constraints which the Telecommunications Act imposes upon local government, they invariably and deliberately omit the preceding section of the Telecommunications Act, where Congress expressly preserved the rights of local governments to regulate the installation of wireless facilities within their respective jurisdictions. Section 332C7A of the TCA explicitly provides, quote, "Except as provided in this paragraph, nothing in this chapter shall limit or affect the ability of a state or local government or instrumentality thereof over decisions regarding the placement, construction, and modification of personal wireless service facilities." That provision of the Telecommunications Act remains unchanged to date. Then there's a subparagraph that explains how the 5 finite limitations may deny wireless facility applications. None of those limitations prevent our council from denying Verizon's application or require the council to grant it. The 5 limitations which the TCA imposes are: 1, local governments cannot unreasonably discriminate among providers of functionally equivalent services. 2, local governments cannot prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting the provision of personal wireless services. 3, local governments must act upon any application to place, construct, or modify within a reasonable period of time. 4, any decision to deny an application to place, construct, or modify shall be in writing and supported by substantial evidence contained in a written record. And 5, local governments cannot regulate the placement, construction, or modification of a wireless facility on the basis of environmental effects of a radio frequent emissions to the extent that such facilities comply with the FCC's regulations concerning such emissions.
This is your 3-minute warning.
Thank you. None of these limitations have been transgressed. That said, Verizon has undoubtedly asserted a baseless claim, as many applicants across the country are doing. They say that a recent decision by the FCC has somehow altered the provision of the TCA to the extent that the council is now mandated by federal law to grant their application. That is without basis in law or fact. If the FCC sought to limit the zoning powers which Congress expressly preserved for local governments, their efforts would be void, because the FCC is entirely without legal authority to divest local governments of powers which Congress has explicitly preserved to them. So to the extent that Verizon asserts that any ruling of the FCC somehow revoked, reduced, or limited the zoning powers which the FCC has expressly preserved to the city, any such attempt to limit the powers would be void, as the FCC has no power to repeal or revoke federal act which has been duly enacted by Congress. In conclusion, we respectfully submit Verizon's appeal of conditions of approval for a use permit be denied, and that our community appeal submitted by Mark Martell and I be granted. The City Council can have confidence in supporting this memorandum and approving our appeal as based on these fundamental points that do not violate the Telecommunications Act. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn. Do we have questions for the appellant? Anyone with questions for the appellant?
I have a question. Lynn Marie, do you have any examples of cities that have successfully denied applications for permits for small cell towers? Either, I know that there's situations where it's happened and litigation has resulted, but situations where there has been litigation where the city ended up in the position where it wanted to be.
Yes, there are two currently. There'll probably be more soon as we learn the tricks of this trade. The first was Monterey early on in 2018, and that was very similar to Sonoma, similar size. There were 12 towers, and a similar kind of historic and beautiful town. So the character, it was important in terms of the aesthetics, and the city of Seaside, which I mentioned earlier, which took 4 years to complete their project. And the appeal by the city council, I don't have the date in front of me, but it was within, I think, the last 6 months or the last year, definitely. And again, similar kind of charming small town that doesn't need these modern industrial poles. So those are the two that I know of in California. I know, I mean, there's a list so long of the cities who the councils denied the permits, and as you said, are either still pending litigation or have been sued into submission, is the way I like to say it. So we're optimistic that that is going to turn around.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for Lynn Marie? All right. Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate your presentation, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and bring it out. We're going now to public comment of the general public. The public comment session is open right now, right? So we're just continuing public comment. And we've got, we'll be reducing the time limit now to 3 minutes. And we've got Megan B.
Cool. Oh, this is a great picture. I didn't miss my picture. Sorry. Oh, thank you so much. I pride myself from being from Sonoma County for many reasons. But the way that our town stays vigilant and the citizens hold appointing government officials with the checks and balances provided to keep transparency within overreach of big pharma or big tech into our small little town. I just asked the continuing vigilancy of our appointed officials and our city council members doing the amazing job at weighing out this heavy weighing issue for our small town. I certainly believe my personal input is that this will be a matter of a fact after the fact, and I think that we should act now instead of later at a possible civil unrest maybe within this small town when the results pending maybe reveal themselves later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Megan. All right. We've got Cynthia.
Is that unmuted?
Yep, go right ahead.
Cynthia Scarborough. I am a resident of Boys Hot Springs, but a 50-year resident of Sonoma Valley, sorry. And as the 58-year resident of the Valley, a graduate of Sonoma High, former ED of Vintage House Senior Center, and current volunteer with Fish and Sustainable Sonoma, I spend considerable time and money within the city limits and am greatly impacted by what happens in and to the city of Sonoma. I strongly urge you to deny the appeal by Verizon and to uphold the appeal by Lynn Marie DeVincent and Mark Markthaler. And I appreciate very much the considerable amount of time they have spent in putting together a cogent and compelling appeal. To their comments, I would add that the introduction to Sonoma's community development element is pretty clear in stating that infrastructure should only be expanded when necessary. And the city's technical consultant, CTC, their on-site field tests confirmed that Verizon's existing network provides adequate coverage. While these proposed small cell nodes under appeal tonight may be a critical part of Verizon's business plan, it isn't appropriate for the city to advance Verizon's business interests. What will the city do if upholding Verizon's appeal tonight, If and when AT&T or Comcast or Spectrum come calling, seeking similar expansions of their networks? What about Huawei? Additionally, the CTC's executive summary acknowledges that its analysis was confined to the technical aspects of the applications and did not include a review or evaluation of the appropriateness of the proposed facilities or sites. My question then is, who has determined that the proposed expansion via small cell nodes is appropriate for Sonoma? And finally, in response to Council Member, I'm going blank on last name. So in response to Rachel's question, I call your attention to the pending federal legislation, Senate Bill 2012, known as the Restoring Local Control over Public Infrastructure Act of 2019, introduced by Dianne Feinstein and supported by the League of California Cities and the U.S. Conference of Mayors, among others. It is very relevant and timely. It would render without force or effect the regulations adopted by FCC in the summer and fall of 2018.
That's 3 minutes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Wendy, if we could give a 1 minute and 30-second update on time so that our guests are aware, our members of the public are aware. I appreciate it, Wendy. Thank you so much. And we're bringing on the second Rachel.
Hello, and thank you for taking my comment. My name is Rachel. I've lived in Sonoma for the past 6 years. Chris and Mark, I wanted to ask where you live. Sonoma is a tight-knit community of people who are proud and protective of our town. When companies without a local tie come in and stand to profit off of us, whether it be through data collection, profits, or pushing an agenda for their own benefit and not the public's, we need to know what the potential motives are and what's in it for us. If you truly are here to improve our service, as you say, why would you bring up the point that if we don't pass this, you aren't sure what the next steps would be? If you are providing a service, as you claim, perhaps the next step, if you are not approved, would be to move on to a community with a demand for your improved service. That would be how a free market would work. Demand should precede supply. It seems like the opposite is happening in this case. No demand, instead a private company demanding a town comply. Chris, when you mentioned that your poll showed that 96% were in support of the project, while only 4% opposed, I wanted to mention that I received that text and your wording, as well as your data collection methods, were manipulative. The text said, to further improve Verizon wireless service in your area, reply yes to this message to tell the city of Sonoma you support small cells, and visit, improveyourwireless.com/Sonoma to learn more and stay informed. When I replied that I do not support it, I received the following message back. It said, this unmonitored mailbox cannot handle your reply. Chris, it seems that your survey was only processing positive responses. Moving on, there are 2 significant areas where you have not provided sufficient burden of proof. The first, you mentioned Sonoma's gaps in coverage and compared it to running on one of 4 cylinders. I'm a Sonoma resident and I've never had an issue with your coverage. You have not provided proof that we have significant gaps in coverage. You mentioned that the small cell antennas are relatively low wattage.
1 minute.
Okay, thanks. If that is the case, assuming your unproven claim that Sonoma is lacking in coverage, is it your intention to ramp up installation of small cells once you get the approval to install? In other words, are these 3 small cells the gateway to blanketing our town in small cells? Another question I have is, can this 4G technology we are discussing today be converted in the future to 5G? Second, the area would be the loss of property value. The perception of Sonoma being 4G town will decrease property values, or could decrease property values. For example, some other towns in California that are seen as higher caliber, Piedmont, Danville, Brentwood, San Anselmo, Mill Valley, Monterey, Seaside, have all fought against small cells. I know that Sonoma is of the caliber of the ones I mentioned, and definitely not a town that will be bullied into submission for the benefit of a private corporation. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Linda Marie DeVincenzo with her hand up, but I think she's already spoken. So we have Dr. Kathy.
Hi, Logan. Mark Marthaler is on my laptop on the other side of the room.
Oh, okay. So
Sorry.
if we could let Lynn Marie in again, which actually is Mark, and allow them to speak, that would be great.
Mr. Mayor, I believe the appellants have had the opportunity to give their presentation, which was 15 minutes, and Mr. Marthaler is an appellant. There will be an opportunity, however, for council to ask questions of the appellants as well as the applicants after the public has spoken.
Okay, so because they didn't divide their time, then we can't allow them to make a public comment as well, because he's an appellant.
If their time has already been exhausted, then that
Okay.
would, yeah, that would be the.
No worries. Apologies, Mark. We'll go ahead with Dr. Kathy.
Here I am. Thank you, Mayor, city members, and staff. Your time spent on this matter is invaluable, and we as residents of Sonoma appreciate all you do. First and foremost, I want to go on record to support the community appeal to deny all permits for cell tower installation within our beautiful town of Sonoma. My name is Dr. Allard, and I'm a licensed psychologist practicing locally. My office is located on West Napa Street, across the street from proposed installation number 6 on 5th Street West. I also own a home on 3rd Street West, close to the proposed installation site number 7. By now, you've heard the many vital arguments as to why we should prohibit the installation of small cell towers. I want to acknowledge the absolutely amazing work that Lynn Marie DeVincenzo and Mark Marthaler have done in representing many of our concerns. I am a Verizon customer as well, and can report to you that the current equipment is working perfectly fine. I've never experienced a dropped call, and I'm able to make calls within city limits with not one issue. And as a doctor handling emergency calls, this has always been important to me to get a good service, and Verizon has been it. I am truly puzzled by their agenda to roll out more technology when the current service is more than adequate. Secondly, because I own a home on 3rd Street West, close to installation site number 7, I'm concerned about the reduction to my property value. Even aesthetically, Verizon, if you hide the towers skillfully, the concerns still remain about being in close proximity to small cell towers. I don't want my investment placed at risk, and the potential loss in my value is not acceptable. I do want to quickly address the less obvious arguments as to why I believe it's imperative to fully support the appeal for small cell tower installation in our town. These are changing times for our world, and in our town, we have all witnessed over the last 4 months. If you are considering approving the 3 installations in question, you are essentially providing approval of the 10 residential installations. If 4G is installed, you're setting the pathway for 5G and their technology with little accountability or oversight. This is not acceptable. The big vital decision is up to each of you. Please don't allow yourself
30 seconds.
be bullied and intimidated by threats typically experienced by cities who have successfully denied their installation. We must say no. Please maintain the uniqueness and freedoms that were founded right here in Sonoma with the birth of our amazing state.
Do we have others for public comment?
We do have several email public comments, Mayor Harvey.
Let's go ahead and get those read. Thank you so much, Latanya. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And thank you for this whole time reading our emails. I really appreciated your efforts during that, and you do such a good job.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's kind of new for all of us, so thank you.
This is from Stephanie Hiller. Dear Mayor Harvey and members of the Sonoma City Council, I wish to draw your attention to the climate impact of the 5G network currently rolling out nationally. Since 5G makes it so easy to download videos and music from the internet, as well as making possible the Internet of Things and driverless cars, altogether a wealth of energy using gadgets that most of us do not need. Additionally, due to the pandemic, we are all using the internet many hours a day, and generally our Zoom meetings are recorded on the cloud, as are many of our documents. The cloud, as many people don't realize, is not a cloud, but acres with buildings housing stacks of computer hard drives. In addition to the energy use required to produce these files and transport them to vast storage centers, a number of organizations, beginning with Greenpeace, have shown that the energy of cloud storage is exponentially greater than storage of home. Some service providers like Google have taken this information to heart and have made attempts to lower the energy use and hence the carbon output. The lifestyle changes we are experiencing with our increased dependence on the web for meetings, education, and other communications are likely to remain with us into the future. 5G will make it possible to create and store more and more wireless devices. Hence, the design of our way of life will be increasingly automated, mechanized, and outside our personal control. Wireless will drive our cars and run the robots who will clean our homes, cook dinner, take care of our aging parents, and perform many other jobs for which humans have been paid. While the electromagnetic emissions crisscross the atmosphere directly over our heads 24 hours a day, releasing increasing amounts of carbon into the upper atmosphere as temperatures rise, and causing numerous health conditions in EMF-sensitive people. In this kind of culture, we want to encourage with these new towers, this is very much a design issue. How do we wish to design our society so that our way of life is compatible with planetary conditions as they become more stressful? 5G will not feed our families, nor protect our water sources, nor raise healthy children. It will simply add to the problems we face and make money for Verizon while selling our data to the mega corporations who use it to design their marketing strategies. All things are indeed connected. 5G is not friendly. It is a surveillance tool, a military instrument, a health hazard, and a climate accelerator, which will facilitate a lifestyle none of us really want. I support this appeal by neighbors for a Sonoma Neighbors for Safe Tech to stop 5G. Thank you, Stephanie Hiller. The next email is from Kathleen Herrera. Regarding the Verizon Small Cell Towers, I want to voice my strong opposition. I am a mother of 2 young children, and I have heard nothing but opposition to these towers from the citizens of this town. Not a single person in support. I watched parents with their small children sobbed at the microphone during the Planning Commission meetings because they are so worried about what these towers may do to our children. They do not want their kids to be guinea pigs, being the first generation growing up next to this technology. I'm not willing to wait and see what happens in 30 years of living next to these towers. People have serious concerns about health, and those concerns are valid and should not be disregarded because the FCC says so. We fully feel that our power to have our voices heard is being stripped away by Verizon and the FCC. If the only valid argument we have is aesthetics, then we certainly have a case there. These towers are huge, imposing, and do not fit into the historical and walker-friendly nature of Sonoma. Our town has a long history of doing away with flags, brightly colored doors, and signs for businesses that were deemed too large. The home I own is also near 2 of these towers, near enough that I would question if I even want to stay living in my home if these towers are approved, and that is truly heartbreaking. People have genuine concerns about their property value going down if they are located near towers. I also would like to see proof of that text campaign numbers because everyone I know who received one responded in the negative. Also, 217 people supporting the towers in a town of 10,000 isn't a very impressive percentage. Finally, the fact that dozens of cities are currently in litigation against the FCC and Verizon make it seem ridiculous that we are being forced into a vote on this right now. Our local government deserves the right to decide what's best for our town without the FCC getting involved. The threat of litigation is very real, but I hope City Council that you will vote for what the people want without fear of how Verizon will retaliate. Thank you, Kathleen Herrera. The next letter is from Martha Glasser. Hello, I am writing as a longtime Sonoma County resident. I began enjoying Sonoma when my parents retired to Oakmont in 1990. Even before my relocation to the county, we would enjoy many family outings from hiking in Jack London State Park to dining in Sonoma and visiting with friends who live in Sonoma. Only a few years ago, other family members rented a home in Sonoma for a vacation, and once again, we are able to enjoy our time in Sonoma. It saddens me greatly to consider the damage to the local views and visits, the loss of property values and loss of tax and tourist revenue, and the physical discomfort I feel if I'm even ever able to visit Sonoma again, where 10 new Verizon cell towers added to your town's unique pastoral landscape. As wireless technologies and antennas proliferate, I have discovered that I experience head and ear pain, heart palpitations, debilitating fatigue, and other symptoms of electromagnetic sensitivity, reactivity to radio frequency radiation. I can manage my symptoms by staying away from the Wi-Fi and wireless technology. It's easy at home to use a wired router, wired computers, mouse, and keyboard. Do wired texting and use a landline telephone at home. I use a cell phone only infrequently. All this is with 2 teenagers, and they cooperate with keeping Wi-Fi devices at a physical distance because my children see how these devices affect and hurt me, and they admit to feeling exhausted when they are around Wi-Fi for too long. I implore you to take your citizens and your unique town to heart. Do not permit these new towers to be installed. The installation of new towers is a degrading development, as they do nothing to improve the true quality of life and health which citizens of Sonoma deserve. With no proven gap in coverage by the telecoms, there is no real need for these wireless transmission facilities. Thank you for your consideration. Sincerely, Martha Glasser. And lastly, I have Isaac Herrera. Hello, I am a resident of the city of Sonoma, and I oppose, and that's all spelled with caps, the Verizon Small Cell Towers. Thank you, Isaac Herrera. And that is all of our email public comments, Mayor Harvey.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Latanya. And we'll go on to Robert with a public comment, a verbal public comment.
Hello? Not sure I can be heard at the moment.
You can be heard, Robert. Please.
Thank you, Logan.
Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity to not just voice my opinion, but to seriously voice my concern. I've lived in the Valley roughly 35 years, seen a lot of changes necessary, changes good in general, especially when it's just evolution of change. And this city has found a way to hold on to its historical roots and still keep that great charm that is a big piece of the industry of this valley, which is the tourism. If we start littering our downtown streets with poles like this, whether they pose an imminent health threat or not, they definitely pose a perceived health threat by most people. That alone, I think, is going to have an impact on the local tourism over time. If these are filtered around or littered around our square in downtown, nobody literally complains about the service downtown Sonoma. Where we need towers and alike is in the outskirts when you lose service. But you don't lose service downtown. There's no call for growing service downtown, except for, again, the misleading survey, which was cute. And it was like anything, it's just all in how you word it. And anyway, and also for myself, my wife and I, we own the business at the light pole on McDonald is getting stuck literally at our property, which is just extremely upsetting for a lot of reasons. And again, I just don't see how these things need to be in the city, downtown city of Sonoma, period. It just, I don't know what else to say. I'm a little frustrated about the whole thing because I didn't even know this was going to be outside our property till 4 days ago. So,
1 minute.
Thank you, Wendy. And that being said, I just had to make my voice heard. Everyone I've spoken to since I found out this was going outside of our parking lot, basically outside our building, I talked to whoever I could in the neighborhood. And also I've talked to a lot of friends and people over the last 4 days, and literally no one knew there were these cell towers going in downtown.
30 seconds.
Thanks, Wendy. So I think you got to do a little more research into knowing what the Valley wants, and I think the Valley does not want this, and you guys got to stand up for that, I believe. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Robert. Next, we've got a 707-364 number. Thank you for joining us. We
Hello?
cannot hear you. Here you are. Hello. Welcome.
Okay, thank you, City Council. My name is Blaze May, and I've lived in Sonoma since 2004. I'm also a small business owner here, and I overwhelmingly support the community appeal to deny all the permits to Verizon to install these small cells in our city. I'm asking at this important juncture for you to protect the people of Sonoma, to literally protect our homes, residential properties, businesses, commercial properties from certain devaluation if these unnecessary small cells are installed. You may or may not be aware of this, but fire stations in California have been exempt since 2004 from having cell towers installed on them because the International Association of Firefighters fought for this after firefighters were having health problems related to the newly installed towers. And this was back with 2G 16 years ago. Today, they are the only exemption in California's new small cell tower bill, SB 649, as well. We love our firefighters, we respect their opinions, and we know that they are not delicate little flowers. And they do not want small cells at their stations. What does this say? I would say we should extrapolate this caution to the rest of our city. Verizon is bullying towns and cities, just like Sonoma, all over California, to do as they want or be sued by them. This is scary and not right. Even though it is hard, we need to hold our ground despite this threat. This is a tough decision for the council, I know, and no matter what decision you make, there will be consequences. The question is, do you want consequences for protecting the people in the city of Sonoma, or the consequences from handing over our city to Verizon and other telecom companies to do whatever they wish? That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We've got Joni next.
Thank you. Hi. My name is Joni Borg. I'm a Sonoma native.
Welcome, Joni.
Thank you, Logan. Pleasure to meet you. I'm also a business owner, and I want to thank the City Council for all their dedication to all events, particularly this one. I want to thank Lynn Marie and Mark for representing many, many, many of us in this concern for these small cell towers. I want to thank every citizen that I've heard so far this evening and in other meetings that speak so eloquently to the important and vital issue that these towers represent, not only for the 3 towers, then perhaps the other 7 residential towers, but the gateway to 5G, which many cities, states, nations in Europe are now putting on the brakes and going, wait a minute. And we should be doing the same thing. Sonoma is a beautiful, amazing place. I have chosen to be here my whole life for that very reason. And Sonoma continues to make ongoing lifestyle choices that are heavily steeped in agriculture, in beauty, in fresh, healthy, vibrant living. And I don't believe that this potential project really goes anywhere near any of those issues.
it feels forced, they feel coerced by Verizon for their own agenda for the future of things that are already regulated by the FCC. Thank you, Wendy. There's something to be said there. You know, people stay here and live here and move here for another kind of life, a special life that Sonoma provides, a rural life. And Sonoma did not become what it is today, nor did it become Condé Nast's #1 tourist destination for high-tech reasons. It became that for other reasons. So thank you. I, again, beseech, and I mean that word, the council to represent us in safety and for a brilliant future, not down this dangerous and profitable to them road. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Joni. Do we have other members of the public who would like to comment? And if you're on the phone, you can dial *9. I'll give just a couple more seconds for people to dial *9. I'm seeing no public comment at the moment. And I'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to council. Time for council discussion, or if you have questions. I have a question for Mark Mothaler. And my question for Mark is, what was your public comment?
Mayor Harvey?
Yes.
So just a suggestion, because we do have to bring people back in and back out. So staff was recommending that maybe if there was anything kind of to go through the questions in some sequences. I don't know. So anyway, your call, just wanted to make sure. So if you want to start with here, then we should probably do all the questions for Lynn Marie and Mark at this point. Council prerogative, thank you.
Yeah, well, wasn't the order Verizon, the appellant, and then the appellant, and then Verizon?
The order was kind of any asking staff to respond to any general questions that came out of public comment, and then any questions to staff and the city's consultant, then Lynn Marie Divinson and Mark Malthaler, and then Verizon and CBR.
We'll work that order.
Again, your prerogative.
That's fine, Kathy. We'll work that order. I'll have the same question in a little bit. So do we have questions for staff? I didn't hear many questions coming out of the public comment period. Did you? Okay. Do we have questions of staff or of our consultant here?
I don't know. This is Madeline. So I don't know. I spoke with John Abachi earlier about the Senator Feinstein's legislation, and I think it's moving forward, but I don't know what it would do for the city of Sonoma. If John or Mr. Afferbach, whomever would like to jump in, I just wanted to get a status. I just looked it up, and it hasn't even opened for debate yet. So whoever.
John,
we can't hear you if you're
John,
speaking.
unmute yourself.
So please unmute yourself.
Sorry. I did look at the status of that bill, and it was introduced about a year ago, and it has not been heard in any committee since that time.
That's what I understand. Thank you, John. And I guess I have, Mr. Mayor, have another question?
You may, Madeline.
There was a comment made earlier about, well, now that we, if this passes, you have 4G and we're moving on to 5G. Who can answer that? Mr. Offerbach or our planning director? What has been found about that? Projection of moving forward on that.
This is Lee Afterbach. These are 4G hardware. All the equipment specified here is for 4G.
Yeah, but I think the question is, and I felt like it was answered, it's either provision number 1 or number 16 that staff is that we may get rid of if we accept the Verizon appeal. And these are the two focuses of theirs. One of them is an increase in the wattage or the power produced. And it sounded like in staff's presentation that it would allow exempting what we basically have, which is, I don't know, is it 250 hertz or whatever metric, would allow Verizon to jump from 4G to 5G without council approval.
And
That
Mr. Mayor,
particular provision was put in there to see if any additional radios were added. The radios that are being installed right now are for 4G service. If they were to add 5G, they would have to add additional services, and that was the reason we put that in there.
We're however, staff's recommendation is that condition be dropped. It would be a very serious risk for the city in litigation, as it does not directly address aesthetics. As far as the question that was asked about 4G and 5G, these are facilities for 4G. If Verizon were to want to add facilities for 5G, then the question would be under federal law as to whether or not they would need a new permit or be able to do that with a permit if it were to be granted by the council.
Thank you, John.
So the answer would be, unless prohibited by federal law, they would be allowed to move from 4G to 5G without council or planning commission approval.
The general rule is when there's a modification to a use permit, then there has to be a new use permit process. However, under federal law, there can be modifications made to a wireless facility that are subject to only an administrative determination and not the city's use permit discretionary determination. And we would have to determine that at the time that the application, or the time that they would make those changes to their facilities.
But if they wouldn't have to inform us, how would we even know?
They would have to inform the city, but under federal law, the city could only determine certain things. And so it would be an administrative process only.
Mr. Mayor, if I can also add to that, what John has said, part of our thinking was that if it's in a vault, there wouldn't be that much of an impact with respect to the aesthetic. And I think putting additional radios below, which would allow them to then go to 5G, would not be an aesthetic issue. It would have been addressed because of the vaulting.
Thank you, David. Do you have additional questions for staff from council? I do have a question. So a lot has been, and we had a number of public comments with regards to gaps in service, and whether or not, and basically saying that because we have no gaps in service, therefore we should deny the permit. Mr. Abachi, is it your opinion that gaps in service are a principal reason to deny? Is it a legal reason to deny a project?
Under the FCC order that is currently in place, it is the material inhibition of one of the items being improvement of service. Gap in service can be one of the bases for that material inhibition, but it is far broader than that. So for the mere fact that there is no significant gap in service, the city cannot deny on that basis.
So just to clarify, if a city has seemingly flawless service, I have a Verizon cell phone, and I use T-Mobile, but for the purposes of this experiment or this thought experiment, I have a Verizon cell phone. I walk around the city. I'm able to make calls. I'm able to watch YouTube videos. I'm able to stream Spotify. I'm able to do all the things, send emails, everything, go on Facebook. Everything that I might want to do with my cell phone is fully capable. Throughout the town, I noticed no experience and loss of service, and in fact, our consultant verifies to a certain extent, and I'll ask you, sir, in a minute about that. But Verizon still feels the need to add additional cell phone towers. Could the city, in such a case, deny a cell phone tower on the basis that basically there is no additional need, but Verizon feels a need to add capacity.
So the question then would be, the city would be able to apply its aesthetic regulations as it does now. The question would then be, would the city be able to simply apply those aesthetic regulations without being concerned with the improvement of service argument by the provider? And in that perfect world where all services that can be provided are being provided to everyone, yes, the city could simply apply its aesthetic regulations, and if it cannot make the finding under its aesthetic regulations, then it could deny the application.
So continuity of service is a factor.
So the provider is allowed to improve their service, to increase their service, to increase their service.
It appears that there's a threshold where service is deemed good enough. And then beyond that, improving service is no longer required. And then aesthetics come into play. Would that be an accurate representation?
Well, the way the FCC order characterizes it is that the encouragement is to have more and more improvement of service, in that sense that there is absolutely the best service that is available, that is provided in the area where they would want to put they would want to put a facility. In that situation, then the FCC order would not bar the city from simply applying its aesthetic regulations and determining whether on the basis of its aesthetic regulations, the application should be granted.
Who has the ability to determine whether or not service is at such a level that it cannot be improved?
Verizon, as the provider, has the ability to determine whether there is an improvement of service, and so they would, make an application to improve their service. But the standard of whether or not the action being taken by the city inhibits that application is simply a standard that would be applied in court.
It's determinable in court. So there's no specific standard where we could go and measure radio frequencies around the city, say we're at this level of service. There's no objective standard. It's completely subjective, and we'd have to determine this in court.
It would ultimately be determined in court. The objectivity is just the material inhibition of services. So it would just be a question of whether that determination can be made.
You know it when you see it. Lee, I do have a question for you. So a lot's been made kind of your work determining level of service throughout the city of Sonoma. What is your determination in terms of level of service around the city of Sonoma? Do we have gaps in coverage? Do we have areas that you could easily argue need to be improved or could use improvement? Do we have gaps in coverage when we have large amounts of people in the city?
What we found in our measurements, first of all, we made the measurements in a vehicle, and that is an area where a signal does not need to be as strong as in a building. So one of the goals of Verizon and the other carriers are to be able to have good quality service, not just for voice, but for video, streaming video in buildings. And so that's one of the reasons that they want to have stronger signals. You'll remember in the old days when cell phones, we would walk around the lawn, can you hear me now, kinds of things. Well, now the idea is to have coverage, ubiquitous coverage. Verizon has 3 licensed bands. Our measurements in the 700 megahertz band found the following, that in 700 megahertz, we had coverage all over the city. But the 700 megahertz band is only 20% of the capacity Verizon has with all their bands. So what this means is that if you happen to live down near the Marriott Hotel over near the ballpark. Then you get full service because you receive all 3 bands. If you happen to be where these 3 sites are going to be, you don't get service in the 80% extra bands. And so if you make measurements there during the day, what you're going to find is that the signal level, as the throughput levels are much lower. So it's not uniform, the coverage, and citizens that are closer to the towers certainly get a much higher data throughput.
At the moment, it would appear that it would sound like in court, it would be difficult for us to argue. It may prove difficult for us to argue that insufficient or sufficient coverage is throughout the city of Sonoma, and that adding additional coverage would not add cell towers. Would that be your opinion?
Yes, I could certainly say that the service is not uniform. If you go back and look at our reports, if you happen to be near the towers, we were getting 50 megabit throughputs. Down where these sites are that we're talking about, we were in the 1 or 2 megabits and below that level. So there's a significant difference. Now, if what you're saying, can you hear me now? Does the telephone work? The voice service is the last one to go. And that's the one that many people are basing text and such. But if you're looking at the higher speed services, like this conference call, I'm speaking to you right now through my Verizon phone because I live on the Bay and we don't have any cable of any kind. And in fact, the site I'm talking to is 10 miles away, but I have an antenna up on the roof to do this. So it just goes to show you what can be done. In the case of Sonoma, downtown, particularly around the motels, in the center part of town, service is relatively poor.
Thank you. Do you have additional questions for staff? The other question I'd have for you, John, is the page 18 of the appellant's revised memorandum, where it says, except as provided in this paragraph, nothing in this chapter shall limit the limit or affect the ability of a state or local government or instrumentality thereof over decisions regarding the placement, construction, or modification of the personal wireless facilities. What are the except as provided in this paragraph that this is referring to?
Those are actually the points that were included in the Limery de Vincent presentation on the appeal, which was that the city cannot effectively prohibit wireless service. The city cannot make a decision on the basis of environmental effects from radio frequency emissions if they are in compliance with federal law. Essentially, the aesthetics, that the city has that authority over aesthetics, those are essentially the same exceptions that are being made.
No other questions? Good. And then what's our next step, Kathy? We're going to...
Next step would be any questions of the appellants, Lynn Marie DeVincent and Mark Monthaler.
Great. So my question for Mark Monthaler stands. What was your public comment?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, just 1 second. We have an interruption here. Just 1 sec. I have a 3-minute comment, essentially.
Well, if you could hasten through it as quickly as you can.
Okay. Well, I'm going to skip the first part, but just say that we are stewards of Sonoma, and at this time and place, it's our duty to protect it from things that would undermine its aesthetic integrity. So my comments are focused on the aesthetics and the rights of the property owners and people who would be affected, negatively impacted by these unnecessary proposed installations. The city of Sonoma has enacted Chapter
Chapter 5.32 to protect aesthetic values, regulate the installation of wireless facilities, and minimize adverse aesthetic and visual impacts on nearby communities. Verizon has submitted photo simulations for each of the sites, 006, 007, and 012. Local governments require photo simulations with clear visual image of the actual aesthetic impacts which a proposed installation is likely to inflict upon the surrounding community. And we've seen in Verizon's introduction of their new pole design and of the very tall tower with a note on top of it. And I'd just like to say with that, that these new designs, a new member of the public that I'm aware of, I certainly haven't seen them, and I'm one of the appellants, got a chance to look at them or give an opinion about them. I think that should be a highlighted point. Verizon has submitted these photo simulations, and not surprisingly, Verizon as the applicant often seeks to disingenuously minimize the visual impact depictions by deliberately omitting any images taken from the perspective of those nearby businesses which would sustain the most severe adverse aesthetic impacts. Such is precisely the case here, as the images presented by Verizon do not include any vantage points showing the most severe adverse aesthetic impacts that the owners and business owners of property and the business owners would get directly in their face, and of their customers' face, and visitors would see more than just one angle. For example, we have the tower with the radio being disguised with a street sign. Okay, well, that's one perspective. Now, if you just walk past that cell tower, if it existed, you would turn around after you pass it and see the backside of this. I guess you would see the radio on the other side. Is it also disguised? So basically you're seeing one angle only. So it's very cherry-picked, you might say.
And that was 3 minutes.
Oh, it was? Oh, do I only have 3 minutes? Okay, well, thank you.
Do we time people in answers to questions of council?
I didn't know I had a time limit.
Well, let's see if we have additional questions for you. All right.
Yeah.
Do you have other questions for Mark or Lynn in council? No? Okay. I'm all right with this. So, okay, so we're good as far as this goes, as far as the appellant's case goes here, and then we'll move on to the applicant. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Lynn. We'll bring in the family plan from Verizon. All right, do we have additional questions for the applicant?
Mr. Mayor, if there are no questions for the applicant, since the appellant had an additional 3 minutes, the applicant should be given an additional 3 minutes, one applicant.
I thought that might happen, and I'm happy to grant that. I do have one question. With the current small cells that you're proposing, what's the expected range of these small cells?
I think that you asked that question earlier about, or somebody else asked the question earlier about how far apart they're spaced.
No, not how far. How far is the effective range?
The effective range in radius is around 1,000 to 1,500 feet, depending on topography and surroundings.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have, if I could just to check to see if we wanted to make any more comments, because I don't think Paul is.
Paul is here. I do have a question. How many cities are you currently in litigation with over the placement of these small cells?
That'll be a question for Paul. Paul, are you on?
Paul would need to unmute himself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yay. I was knocked out of the meeting for about half an hour and it would not let me back in, saying that I've been permanently dismissed from the meeting. But I can answer that question quickly. And I have to say, we don't pride ourselves on litigation. We pride ourselves on solving problems. The majority of our cases, we are representing the cities and counties in defense of litigation. So we've actually successfully defended the county of Sonoma, the city of Cotati, the city of Berkeley, the city of Palo Alto. We've defended against neighbor lawsuits. In this, recently, we were unfortunately had to sue the city of Danville, and we won that case in September, and are moving forward with utility pole installations in that town. We're currently in litigation with AT&T against the city of Los Altos, and that litigation is proceeding towards summary judgment motions in the next couple months. I do want to point out the city of Seaside, we worked with for 3 years. There was originally proposed a church tower. The city asked us to look into small cells. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The city asked us to look into small cells. We applied for small cells. The city of Seaside ultimately decided they preferred to have a macro tower. So we built a macro tower in Seaside. We did not withdraw from Seaside. And I have to say, we have hundreds of sites in San Francisco, San Jose, Sacramento. In San Francisco, we have 400 of these light standard designs already constructed. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Paul. Why was it possible to go with underground small cell technology in Palo Alto?
We have not gone underground in Palo Alto. We actually went through a multi-year process with vaulting analyses to show that we could not place radios underground in Palo Alto. We have not done that. Crown Castle has put some radios in mailboxes, but all of our designs have been approved with above ground radios in Palo Alto.
Okay.
So, Mr. Mayor, can I ask a question?
You may.
Sure, thank you. So I'm sorry, Mr. Albritton, but I'm like the comedian of the council. So the litigation that you've, I guess, been on the positive side of, do they end up with wooden poles, or is it just we are going to?
The litigation that I spoke of was mostly macro cell sites. So on a rooftop of an apartment building in Berkeley, a tree pole in Cotati, a tree pole in Sonoma County. And by the way, there was a question about residency. I'm a resident of Sonoma County, as is Bill Hammett, who is our RF engineer, is actually a resident of Sonoma, city of Sonoma. And so the only litigation so far that I have had to do on wooden poles is in Danville, where we were successful, and we're currently in litigation in Los Altos. I have to say I'm a former elected official, and I do everything I can and we can to try and resolve these issues without litigation.
Well, I know this is sort of out of the discussion, but you know, unfortunately, we've had horrible fires here, and I don't know about those wooden poles, Mr. Albritton.
Actually, when we do wooden poles, and in this case, we're not talking about wooden poles. In fact, I've been authorized to tell you that if you approve the like standard poles this evening without vaults, we will withdraw our wood pole applications in the residential zones, the 7 that we have. And I can answer your question further, but generally, when we do put facilities on a wood pole, they are structurally analyzed and, if necessary, replaced, so that the poles are generally stronger and more durable and more survivable after we've placed facilities on them. We've also put substantial wood pole facilities in Contra Costa County and in many places.
Thank you.
I hope my offer was clear there.
Yeah.
Additional questions? Do we still have to grant them an additional 3 minutes here? Yep, I'm seeing a yes. Let's go ahead and do it.
Okay, I'll be very brief.
Is there litigious?
Pardon me?
Go ahead.
I think I missed what you said.
Said since you're litigious.
But I've just told you that we're not.
Okay.
I've told you we have 2 lawsuits, and we have worked in scores of jurisdictions up and down the state with mutual agreements with Newport Beach, mutual agreements with Napa, mutual agreements with San Francisco, where we try and work with communities like we're trying to work with Sonoma. And
how many of those mutual agreements came with threats of litigation and switching to wooden poles?
No. And I'm not sure why you're focused on that issue. It's the threats. That is not necessarily the action that Verizon Wireless would take. It could take any number of actions. And that would just be pursuing applications, not litigation, following up on our original applications that we made 2 years ago, where based on the request of faulting, we went through this full redesign in order to come up with something that would be acceptable to the community. And I have to say, with respect to your other comments about vaulting radios and using the 2268s and so forth, the federal courts have also spoken very clearly about that in the Clarkstown case, that a local jurisdiction can't dictate the technology that we use to provide our services. That's in the purview of the FCC. And to echo what Lee Afflerbach said, and what I said at the beginning, the areas that Lee identified that do not have our AWS and PCS service, that frequency, means that we're unable to use that frequency that was purchased from the FCC in that part of the city, and that we therefore are operating on, Lee said, 20% of our available network. And that the whole point of the federal law is to allow us to provide service in those frequencies that we've licensed from the FCC. And that's the coverage gap, and that's the significant gap we've identified. And then we've worked as best we could to limit the aesthetics in these light standards that we proposed. And we've limited our applications to those commercial areas that are away from residential zones in order to meet our immediate demands. So I think we really have done, we've worked very hard, I have to say, over the last couple of years. And those cell phones are tremendously important to you in fire season. I have been mandatorily evicted 3 times evacuated, not evicted, in Sonoma County because of fire. And each time, the only lifeline I had was my Verizon Wireless phone, because it was the only thing that was working. The power was out, the phones were out, and it was the way I was able to get information. And we think this is vital technology. In the 2017 fire, 44 people died because there were no Nixle messages. 2 years later, Nixle messages were sent and no one died. And that's because people had cell phones that could receive the signal and safely find shelter away from the fire.
That's 3 minutes.
I can stop now. I can answer the many questions that came up, if you wish, from the various residents regarding all the questions they had, if you want. And I appreciate your giving me the additional time to speak. I made the offer that I did, that if you elect to approve these facilities without vaults, Verizon is willing to withdraw its remaining residential applications and continue an effort to collaborate and come up with networks that serve the community with the least aesthetic impacts.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, on that part, David here, I I certainly appreciate Mr. Albritton's commitment there. It would seem to me that an appropriate method in which to embrace that would be to have a condition of approval, not trying to predetermine where the council is going to go, but if that is the determination of the council, that would need to be memorialized in some basis that would then ensure that that would indeed be the case.
Fully agree. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Verizon. I think that's it for questions that we have for this company.
So Mayor Harvey, if at this point, if council has no other questions from any members of the public, either of the appellants, then you would close the public hearings. So maybe if you want to ask your colleagues if they're done, because otherwise you would be moving to your discussion and your deliberation based on the information that you have received prior and during today's public hearing.
Do we have additional questions? All right, then we'll go ahead and move on to council member comments.
Can you formally, Mayor Harvey,
Oh,
I'm
let's
sorry, can you
close public
formally
comment with
close,
I got to do the clap. Okay.
formally close the public hearing?
I would like to close the public hearing.
Thank you.
Bring it back to the council for
It's
public.
very
comment.
official. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
It is a very official clap. I've been working on it. I do it often in the mirror to make it more and more official as time goes on. And I do miss my gavel so much. But one day we will be reunited. Great. So do we have comments from council?
Mhm.
Well, I guess I'll go ahead and start. You know, I've been on the council for 7 years, almost 8 years, did 2 terms. The work that we've done in the city, trying to protect the look and the character of Sonoma. One example would be the street signs that we changed over to look historical. My fear is that this is going to be so un-Sonoma, and I'll be upholding the appeal tonight.
Which appeal?
Which appeal?
The defensive, the mark and defensive.
That the third one?
Denial of all cell towers.
Yes, because I'm worried about the character of Sonoma.
Okay. As mayor, I'm going last. So if Councilmember Agrimonti or Vice Mayor,
I'm curious to hear what Councilmember Agrimonti has to say, unless she wants to wait.
It's kind of interesting, you know. I love compromise, but I feel that there's some weight here with respect to coming into our small town. And you know, I watch CNBC, so I'm not afraid of big corporations. That's all I watch. It's either that or murder shows. So CNBC, and I know how powerful these corporations are. They've made it through the pandemic. They've made it through a lot of things. Huawei, of course, is probably going to be under investigation for security issues. That's not part of this, but I'm somewhere. I think I still would like to look at the approve with undergrounding and deny Verizon's appeal.
would you also be supportive of denying or supporting the DaVinci appeal?
It says here, I'm going for the one in the middle, approve with undergrounding, deny Verizon appeal. Right.
But you would allow the sites, the existing sites with undergrounding. So you would
Yes.
deny the DaVinci appeal. Okay.
Yes.
I'll go next. So I think that proceedings like this, while an important part of our process, specifically in situations when we're up against, you know, these huge behemoth companies where it's like your choices before you are either you know, in light of your 20% budget cut that you're about to do because we're in a global pandemic and we have no money, like sign yourself up for litigation that you can't afford, or be strong-armed into making a decision that's just going to help said behemoth just keep making more money. And so I looked up today and I saw that the National League of Cities has predicted that cities across the United States are going to have $134 billion revenue shortfall this next year because of the pandemic, and that just happens to be how much Verizon makes in 1 year. So it's not a playing field where we can start from equal sides, because we know that if we don't give exactly what Verizon wants, then we're going to end up in a hard situation where we're already figuring out what programs we're going to cut, you know, trying to hang on to our employees that we have, trying to keep our, you know, vision for the future going forward and making a better world for people of Sonoma. And that having a lawsuit like this piled on top of that is just going to be devastating. So I feel like we're totally in a rock and a hard place. I hear Verizon saying that they've spent 2 years trying to work with us. You know, all the cities that they listed off, I don't see how any of those are even remotely close to Sonoma. All of the cities that were like Sonoma that they listed off are the ones that they've been in litigation with. So I know how they see us, and I know that they know that they're going to end up where they want to be one way or the other. And so this thought of working together, you know, their attorney at the end asked why he wasn't sure why we're so focused on the wooden poles, but you know, the wooden poles were brought out as this threat of, if you don't give us this pretty thing that we designed for you the way that we want it, then we're going to give you these ugly poles. And so on top of all the money that we could lose in being in a lawsuit over this, we're going to end up with ugly poles, because they've already thrown that out there, which I have no idea why that's necessary. So within that landscape, I find it to be a challenging situation. I appreciate all of the information that we've received from a lot of people. We've had, since this has gotten postponed, we've had much time to review lots of things. And Lynn Marie and Mark, I'm so grateful for your work that you've done for the community and taking a position that, you know, doesn't bring you any sort of direct personal benefit other than knowing that you're fighting something that's important for the community. I believe that the FCC has intentionally put us in a box where we are very limited in what we can do in situations like this. One of those that is proven to be in our realm is aesthetics. We're a city of 2.75 square miles. We are tiny. We have these applications before us now, but the fact is, every cellular phone provider is going to be entitled to the same thing that we give Verizon. In fact, Verizon is going to be entitled to more of what we give Verizon. So it's not just what's before us. This is like opening a door to what we're like going to let inside our tiny, tiny little city. So I think that the Planning Commission did a great job considering this matter and weighing all of the alternatives. And I think that they came up with a really good solution, facing what I agree with to be an unfortunate reality of not being able to say no completely, but also recognizing that our sidewalks are limited. And so if you think of all of the things that are going to be crowded on there, there's a reason that we're moving towards undergrounding things, and why in a lot of places things are undergrounded. So the condition that they imposed to underground is the same thing that's been imposed on other utilities. I think we're going to see even more of that in light of the complications we've had related to wind and fire. So I am leaning towards supporting what the Planning Commission decided, with the exception of condition 16, which it appears in the aftermath of that, it's determined that that's not really something that we should hang our hat on. So I I find it unfortunate that this is the way this kind of business goes. And Verizon's going to keep being Verizon regardless and making tons of money. I was trying to figure out how many Sonoma budgets it would take to get to 1 year of a Verizon budget, but I ran out of zeros in my math. But I do know that every day they make approximately $360 million, and our annual budget on a good year is about $30 million, and we're cutting it because we are in the midst of a global pandemic and we have no money. So that's what I'm thinking, and I'm interested to hear what our mayor thinks.
If I could just interject at this point, Mr. Mayor, as there are four council members, tonight, we did check the municipal code to see if, in the event that there is a tie, what the effect would be, and the municipal code states that the planning commission decision would then be upheld.
Thank you. And if not a tie, basically if no majority is reached, then the planning commission is upheld.
That would appear to be the case under the municipal code.
Great. So I agree with the comments that are made by both Councilmember Cook, Councilmember Agrimonti, and of course Vice Mayor Hundley, and I think Vice Mayor Hundley put it very well. This is a behemoth company that provides a service that we do all use, cell phones. I don't think anybody that's on this call is unfamiliar with cell phone technology. But it is disappointing that we find ourselves in this place where we have to decide between, the beauty of our community and our city budget and what we can afford to do in this space. And there isn't much, it's working with us, and I appreciate the efforts that have been put in and the time that our planning director, David Storr, and our planning commission and our city manager and our legal team and everybody has spent with Verizon's team to get us to where we are. But it's working with us with overhanging threat that feels like if we don't eventually do what is requested of us by Verizon, that we'll be sued. That you'll take our money, and not only will we take your money, but we'll ugly your city. We'll put wooden poles to just bring it back to square one, to show you that we get to decide what we want, and that we get to decide what's best for the city. And at the same time, when we're looking at budget cuts and capital improvement cuts, to spend additional monies on this on litigation is something that I find really concerning, especially when we're told by Verizon that undergrounding is impossible and it would take a 500-mile cable going down into the core of the earth and back out to make this possible, which seems fascinating to me. But then a quick Google search reveals the existence of cable wireless undergrounding services that are available widely through Ericsson, which is the company that Verizon broadly contracts with for their antennas. The standard is that we can't put in harsh impediments. We can't put in impediments that would prohibit the ability of Verizon to produce the cell service that they need. And their argument is effectively that undergrounding would create such an impediment. But the existence of cell service that is pre-made and created by the company that they use to underground antennas and use manhole covers as the topper seems to suggest that it's totally feasible to me to provide the undergrounding. I thought it was also interesting that the lawyer from Verizon mentioned the 2017 fires and the great service that Verizon provided the community, but didn't mention the fact that they throttled, Verizon specifically throttled cell service for firefighters during that time. I've heard from Verizon that it was a mistake or whatever else, but mistake or not, our first responders' ability to fight fires and protect lives was inhibited by Verizon. I'd like to remind everybody in the community of that. I think that's important. So for me, you know, and finally, the residential piece, this great gift of removing the residential requirement, and we're going to go with the nice poles. It feels more like a threat to me than it does a kindness. It feels more like here's another thing that you'll lose if you dare to stand up to us. And so, you know, I do feel broadly inclined to say no to this. Yeah, that's kind of where I stand. And especially when we have a council that's strong on that, I feel like fiscally it's a very, very difficult decision. And it's not something a decision that I make lightly, or a decision that I'd like to do. But to me, it feels like the right thing to do is to uphold the Planning Commission's decision, and to move forward with that. As much as I don't appreciate the way this is working, I wish that Verizon would, if they were true community partners, listen to the community and say, we want to protect your property values. We want to protect the beautification of the city. We don't want to open up a Pandora's box, as Vice Mayor Hundley suggested, where every single Sprint, AT&T, Cricket Wireless, and 37 other different providers can come through and put poles all over your city, and we'll have a light pole every 20 meters. I wish that they were truly community partners and would just go with what our community said, which is what the Planning Commission said, which is to underground. So right now, that's where I'm at. And it looks like that's where broadly council is as well.
I just interject, Mr. Mayor, that the Planning Commission did approve condition number 16. So if the council were to take action denying each appeal,
I'm happy to move away from position number 16. I think it weakens our case, so I'm happy to change that. And
Make a motion if we're ready.
Okay.
I would like to make a motion to, are we giving direction, or are we actually granting or denying at this point, Mr. Attorney?
I think you could make a straw vote, would be fine, because the final action has to be memorialized in a resolution nonetheless. So I think a straw vote would be fine. Make a straw vote that in the fashion you've already indicated would be fine.
Great. So does that mean a motion needed, or the information has been delivered?
No, I think you could say, I make a straw vote to uphold the Planning Commission, deny Verizon's appeal, deny the appeal of the appellants, and delete condition number 16 and direct staff to come back with a resolution consistent with that straw vote. Get a second, and then the council can vote.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote. Acting City Clerk.
Councilmember Cook,
No.
Councilmember Agrimonti,
I'm confused now.
David's voting against it because David wanted to accept the Vincent appeal and deny Verizon's appeal. But this motion is to deny the Vincent appeal, but accept the Verizon appeal with or deny the Verizon appeals as well, with the exception of rule number 16. So this is the middle ground.
This is the Planning Commission, except we're changing condition 16.
Correct.
Okay, so yes, with Rachel Hundley.
Vice Mayor
Aye.
Hundley,
Yes.
Mayor Harvey.
And I also vote yes.
Pardon?
Also vote yes. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
One
Thank
more
you.
time.
Thank you. The motion carries 3-1.
Thank you. All right.
Where's oh,
So move on to, that is the conclusion of item number 5.0 public hearing, item number 5.1. We'll move on to, that's it. So we're done. And do we have any council member reports or comments? No.
No.
City manager comments or announcements?
None, thank you.
City attorney, a comment?
None, thank you.
Thank you. All right, meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.